Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is a change to the initial program, and a big thanks to Kristina for stepping in at short notice and kind of filling a gap that appeared in the whole program. I know that some of you will be interested in e-portfolios. Certainly at Waikato Uni, this is something we've kind of been a bit of a late starter to, but we're starting to kind of get more interest now in e-portfolios, and particularly Mahara. And we're very interested, because obviously we're Moodle users, in some of the synergies that occur between Moodle and Mahara. And so Kristina's going to help enlighten us on that.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And hello also, welcome from me to this MoodleMoot. And my name is Kristina Hoeppner, and I work for Catalyst IT, which is the main development company of Mahara. We are also a Moodle partner, as you can see from my shirt. We kind of do both, depending on which site you're looking at. And Stuart asked me to talk a little bit about the connection between Moodle and Mahara, because of course we can talk about both systems each in isolation, but it actually becomes really, really interesting when we look at them together. And that's where my title comes in, that usually Moodle and Mahara then can take off together. And so, of course, since you're all here at MoodleMoot, you at least have a rudimentary understanding of what Moodle is, and a lot of you actually already have years and years of experience in using Moodle. So I'll actually keep my my presentation on the things I'm going to say about Moodle really, really short, because I would be teaching to the choir and you already know everything. And so I'd rather look at the e-portfolio side and how that can get into it. And what I'd also like to do is not just talk for the next hour, but kind of have a rather brief presentation, and then also look at an example, and then also opening it up especially for questions, so that you can actually also get something out of it and not just hear me talk here. So on the one hand, we have Moodle, but then on the second hand, we also have Mahara, which is an e-portfolio system, and together they can complement each other very nicely. They can help each other out, where one system does not really have all the capabilities that the other system has, because as we also know from Moodle, it can do a lot of things, but it cannot do exactly the same things that dedicated softwares can do. So for example, Moodle has a wiki, but is it as good as Wikipedia's or like MediaWiki? It has a blog, but is it as good as some other product? So of course Moodle can do quite a lot of things really, really nicely. But in some areas we can say, well, it could be a little bit better if we just had that functionality that we know from another software that we are using, which is just dedicated to that functionality. And that is also where Mahara comes in. And so they both help each other out. And so what we usually call this combination then of Mahara and Moodle is Mahoodle. It's not a new product. It is just the two of them together, connected via MNet. This MNet Moodle networking functionality, where you can also connect 2 Moodles or 3 Moodles with each other. You can also connect Mahara to it, simply because Mahara was an initiative that started its development work at Catalyst, and a number of our Moodle developers became Mahara developers. And so, of course, they looked at the things that worked really, really well in Moodle and kind of took them along and also made it a way so that the learning management system could easily be connected to the e-portfolio system. So now what can Mahara actually do? It is a Māori term, and it means to think or thinking. And that's what you do in an e-portfolio. You can create your content, but you don't just want to create content in the system itself, but you also want to collect it from other resources, because a lot of content that we want to keep over a longer period of time, we actually have sitting on our computers, on tablet computers, on the phone, and so we also want to have that available then in the e-portfolio easily. And because we also do quite a lot of content creation online these days, we don't just want to upload things, but we want to aggregate things from other resources and other sites. So use RSS feeds, for example, or embed videos, embed presentations, slide shares, and a lot of other things, because there are some sites out there where we can have multimedia content created, and we don't want to do it doubly. And of course, for a portfolio, not just an e-portfolio, but portfolios in general, it is really interesting and necessary that we also reflect on what we have done. because otherwise it wouldn't really be a learning portfolio or a development portfolio. It would be more a showcase portfolio. So reflecting is also very important, and that's what we can do a lot of times just in journals, in blogs, and the like. And of course, when we look at a portfolio, or when we just collect content, we have this big collection, but somehow we need to organize it, to make sense of it, to give other people a view into our life, into our portfolio, and really allow them to look at things, but not just random bits and pieces, but really in a structured way, in a way so that they can also understand our content. And then, of course, we also want to present these things, because it is really nice to just keep a portfolio for ourselves, but a lot of times we do want to share it with others, want to get their input, and also want to collaborate in certain aspects sometimes, so that we can also have a group portfolio if the situation warrants, if there's a class where students work together, and instead of then writing an exam at the end, they turn in a group project, which can also be in the form of a portfolio. And another possibility that Mahara offers is that you can network with others in groups via discussion forums, but also creating and sharing files together, creating pages together. And also you can have rudimentary social networking features like friends, so that you can connect with others more easily and send them messages. Now you might say, well, that's actually a lot of things that Moodle can do as well. We can embed content, we can have RSS feeds in there, we can have discussion forums, students can have groups and so on. But what I usually find in Moodle is that it is restricted, that it's usually only teachers who can set things up, or there is the manager who has control over the course creation button, and that it is always very managed, whereas in Mahara it is open. Sure, you can decide that only administrators are allowed to create groups, but even on myportfolio.school.nz, which is a site with over 1,200 New Zealand schools connected, we leave it open to everyone to create groups. So currently we almost have 10,000 groups on it. Some are really, really good for classroom assessments and the like, whereas then we also have some more social groups where students just get together and fool around a bit and just connect with each other. But it is open for everyone to do so, and for everyone to go into the learning where they want to be. And so altogether, now you might ask, well, what can you use an ePortfolio for? There are a lot of different purposes. And on the screen, you just see 4 of them. One is a showcase portfolio. That's the one that we are most familiar with. When we see artists who want to exhibit in a gallery, or when we look at architects who want to build another, or who want to design a big project, then they usually need to show their competencies and their skills. They need to show what awesome things they have already done. And that's what you can do in a showcase portfolio. A showcase portfolio can also be used for employment purposes. So if you apply at a company or at a university for a job, then you can have your portfolio there and show off how good you are, what you have done, and not just tell them that you have a master's in XYZ, but that you actually show them what you have done for this master's, what great projects you have done, because that really gives them the evidence that they need in order to make a good decision whether to employ you or not, for example. Then we also have a reflective portfolio, which is more like thinking back on what we have done. So, for example, for teachers, they can reflect back on the curriculum design that they've done, on the lesson plans they've created, on the lessons they've taught. Once I go out of this room here, also after this presentation, I can reflect on, did I do a good job, in my opinion? Should I have asked Stuart earlier to know whether I should present, or should I have prepared the night before and not just the morning before or during the previous presentation, or things like that. That is a lot of things that we normally do in our head just quietly, whereas the portfolio really draws it out of us. It makes it explicit. It doesn't mean that we have to write it down in terms of typing. It can also mean that we do an audio recording or a video recording or a visualization. We've seen some really, really nice visualizations of Julia Forsyth earlier in Nigel's talk. And that is also a way of capturing something that we want to keep in order to remember it later on more nicely. We also have a developmental portfolio, for example, and that is a portfolio that really shows your progress over time. So looking at a language learner, starting out in a language at the beginning of the term, and then progressing throughout the entire term. What can they do at the end of the term? There, it's often not enough just to look at the end of the term and say, hey, I've learned 100 words, but also to look at the beginning. Well, I started at 0 words, and that's how much I learned. Because a lot of times when we are at an end point, we forget about the journey. And the journey is oftentimes really, really important in order to see how much progress we've actually made. Because not everybody starts out at 0 and ends at 100. Some might already start out at 20 and only arrive at 100. So students starting out lower kind of have to have a higher, bigger progression, and that's showing that can be very good in an e-portfolio. And then, of course, it could also be used for assessment purposes, so that you do get a grade at the end for the work that you've shown in your portfolio. But as you can also see, I hope you also heard it a little bit in the brief examples I gave you, is that there aren't really any direct boundaries. So you can have a showcase portfolio which contains reflections, and you can also have a showcase and reflective portfolio which shows your progress over time. It is really what you want to make out of it, and sometimes also what the institution where you're at wants to make out of it. And it could also be that you start out with a reflective portfolio, and then at the end of a term also create a showcase portfolio, or it merges into one, simply because that's where it needs to be or what you want to do in order to show off your skills. So there's no either or in there. It is more an and that stands between the different types, and it is what you want to make out of it. And especially when you're teaching others, when you're facilitating the learning of others, be it at school, university, or in your organization, then it comes down to what do you want to achieve. So don't just say, oh, we are implementing portfolios and then that's it, but kind of really look into why do you want to implement portfolios, how do you want to implement it, and what are your learners supposed to get out of it. Because if they don't really want to do it, it's going to be one of these things that are just started and then never really finished or continued and just are there. And so when we look at the e-portfolio side of learning, and especially in Mahara, we place the learner in the center. Because the learner pretty much builds up his personal learning environment. For the learning management system, usually the management system is in the center, whereas we always see the learner in the center. Because it is the learner who then is part of an institution and who interacts with this institution. And of course, that institution also interacts with the learner. It's never a one-way street only. And then this institution, with the learner inside, is part of a wider community. That can be the city, that can be a country, that can also just be a family around it. And again, they all interact with each other. The learner also interacts with the community. And if we really go wide, then there's also the world. And we also interact with the world, and the world interacts with us. I mean, we've seen it quite nicely with learning management systems or online learning in general, that we are not confined to the experts that are within our institution, but we can go out there within our community and bring them in, which you can also do in a face-to-face classroom. But with online learning, you can bring in the experts no matter where they live in the world and really have them interact with your learners, answer questions, have discussions with them, and to learn from them without them needing to be here in that very classroom at the University of Waikato. And so that's where the online part comes in nicely. And with the e-portfolio, you can have the same thing. You as learner are in the center, but you interact with a lot of different people. You can open up your portfolio just for your class, for your fellow students, or for the teacher where you need to do the portfolio. But you can also open it up and show your family, your friends, or your employer. And then in the end, if you're brave, you can also open it up to the entire world and also get feedback from others who are in a similar situation or work on a similar project and can also help you and give you some more insight. And so just a few examples of where you can find portfolios. Here in New Zealand, we've got many different portfolio users, kind of as different in size as these marbles, and also differently shaped than And we have two very big installations. You might have already heard of myportfolio.school and also myportfolio.ac.nz. And .school is available to all schools in New Zealand. Currently, there are about half of them already on the system, with about 57,000 students actively using it. Not necessarily on a day-to-day basis, but at least occasionally and more or less with their teachers. That does not mean that every institution, every school needs to be one of these big marbles where everybody uses the portfolio, where it is implemented throughout the entire school. It can also be that there's only one teacher trialing it with one of their classes and just having 10 or 20 students working with the e-portfolio. And in other schools, we have teachers primarily using it for teacher appraisal purposes. So they start out familiarizing themselves more with the e-portfolio idea, because it is not just that we tell students, now you have to do an e-portfolio, but it's actually quite tricky to keep your own e-portfolio, and knowing what is involved in that can actually also help and inform how you're using the portfolios in your classroom. Because how many of you keep a blog? 1, 2, 3, yes. How many of you write a post regularly, once a week? Perfect. How many once every 3 months? What? Yep. And that shows us, because if we demand our students to reflect on a regular basis, at least once a week, we should also be diligent and as conscientious in doing the same thing. And that is difficult. So knowing what that process involves and knowing how hard it is to do that on a regular basis can also help us give guidance to the students and give them some tips and tricks. You have probably tons to share, and let us know how your good recipe for blogging on a regular basis, because that is very tricky and it demands a lot of work. And so if we put that on top of what the students already have to do, or any learner in an organization, then there must be some rewards for them. Then they need to see why they are doing it. In the tertiary sector, there are also numerous Mahara users, and on .ac there are already over 52 institutions connected. But similarly to schools, there are also those in New Zealand that have their own installations. They are not all on these two big installations, but some have them directly at their university or at their school due to certain circumstances that demand it, or because they want to have their own installation and just make customizations that they want. And around the world, there are lots of schools and also universities using it, and a number of them do come via Moodle, because it is just a very easy e-portfolio system to connect to due to the MNET factor. And what you can do in the eLearn e-portfolio system, and especially Mahara through the collaborative features, is also that you are not there on your own as an individual, just working away and not seeing anybody else. But you can support each other, because in the e-portfolio you can encourage also feedback. In regular paper-based portfolios, it was also possible, but really, when did you get a report or written feedback from a teacher back about it? At the university where I worked before, that didn't really happen. So a lot of times that feedback that a teacher gave a student just got lost. Whereas on the e-portfolio, you can put it bang right onto the page, and it can stay there. It doesn't go away, and so it also becomes part of your e-portfolio. It isn't just kept separately. And so when this support is given, then also everyone kind of engages in shaping the e-portfolio and shaping the thinking of a person, because you're talking to others, you get feedback from others, you see what your fellow colleagues are doing, and that's how you can also learn, because we are not just learning from books or from what we see online, but we are also learning from the person sitting next to us or from the person talking to us. And so all that is really, really important also in the e-portfolio. It's not just that it sits online, but actually the entire practice around portfolios. And so working together, shaping the portfolio of a single user helps in an environment that is available online, where multiple people have access to it, and where you can also give permissions on the basis of who shall see your portfolio. Because in contrast to well-known blogging software, for example, the ePortfolio and Mahara there gives you the opportunity to share your portfolio just with a particular person or with a specific group or with everybody or with 2 people, depending on who really shall look at your portfolio. So you do not have to make it available to everyone immediately, but you can give gradual access, or you can really only give access to 1 person. So it can be used in very granular matter for learning and also for still having a safe environment. And of course, through that, through giving support, through engaging with each other, everybody learns from each other. And that is the important thing, because that's what we want to foster. We want to foster learning. We don't really want to make everyone a developer in a classroom or make everyone understand Moodle or Mahara into the last tiny bit. What we want is that people learn, that students learn, that everyone with whom we engage learn, and that is their primary focus. Sure, we also need developers, Moodle and Mahara developers, and everybody else, but that is the second step. That is separate from what we want to do in a regular classroom. And just to show you that learning doesn't just take place here in the classroom or in the halls between 9 and 5, I'll have a short video about 240 minutes in a day of my portfolio. This is the myportfolio.school version. Just taking the first 10 minutes of each hour, because otherwise we'd be sitting here for quite a long time, and just showing you when students engage on that platform. Keep in mind that it's about 45,000 potential users, but normally we have around 600 to 700 users a day logging in and doing things, and even on the weekend, oh no, sorry, it's actually up to 1,500, and even on the weekends there was about 400 students still working on it, and you'll soon see why. I get that to work. Sorry. Oh, it's already. Okay, it starts around 6 o'clock in the morning. People get ready for the school day. And 8 o'clock it gets a bit more intense, because now the students log on to their computers in school, sometimes also type each other or send each other messages or update their portfolios. We do have some schools that kind of have 100 students in a classroom updating portfolios at the same time. That's when it's kind of really, really busy there. Now we're getting in the early afternoon, and you see still quite a lot of activity, but now it's decreasing a bit, and I believe because students are just going home and don't yet work on their portfolio on their way home. But now, right before dinner, lots of activity because students are probably doing homework. During dinner, not so much, which is quite nice, so that they actually have some family time. And then right before going to bed, there's a bit more activity from the students. But also looking at the timestamp now, it's already 10 o'clock in the evening, and there's still a heck of a lot of things going on. So it's probably teachers also updating assignments for their students and giving feedback to their students. And even at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and also 3 o'clock, do we have people logging in? Granted, not as many as during the daytime, but still, there's pretty much no time during the day when learning doesn't take place. And if you run the analytics through of your Moodle site, you'll probably see a similar thing, that no matter when you look at the time of the day, there is always activity. So there's 24/7 learning, even when it is just within one institution confined to a geographical place, does take place, because that is what we allow students and teachers to do, to work no matter when they want to. And the same thing also applies for the ePortfolio, because that is oftentimes even less bound to a certain course, but oftentimes can just be updated whenever you want, so you have all your artifacts in place, all the content that you want to keep in your portfolio, arrange it into pages and so on. that was just a very quick introduction to e-portfolios and also especially of how you could use Mahara together with Moodle. Though I left out quite a number of things because I did want to show you very briefly of how you can actually, what this connection between Moodle and Mahara could look like. Just by going to my portfolio that I've set up, and actually just starting on our Moodle site that we have at Catalyst. And once you have set up the Mnet connection to Mahara, I'm not going to show you how to do that because there are some very nice instructions out there. It's a fairly simple process connecting a Moodle to a Mahara site. And once you have done that, you can actually just log into your Moodle site and jump directly into Mahara. And that can be done by a block. It's usually called network servers. And if you're an institution that already has Mnet connection set up to other institutions here in New Zealand, then you're already familiar with it. So once I click on the link to my portfolio, I jump directly into my portfolio and I can use all the functionality there. And that is a very simple way of doing single sign-on, for example, and just moving from one place to another. And now if I just want to go back to Moodle, I only need to click on the link to Moodle and get back. So for demonstration purposes, I created a very brief, short, very extremely simple course in Moodle with just 3 different activities, namely an assignment, a glossary, and then also a discussion forum. Because what the connection between Moodle and Mahara allows you since Moodle 2 is that you can send your own personal content directly into your portfolio. So you sidestep this way of uploading it to Moodle, then again potentially downloading it into your computer and then uploading it again to your portfolio. So you can go straight from Moodle to Mahara. And in the case of the assignment, then there is the export. Once you have established the connection between Moodle and Mahara and allowed the ePortfolio repository, you can click on the export link and send it straight to Mahara. There I do want to have it as PDF file, and what is also nice is that you already see how many times you uploaded that before. In this case, I practiced it a little bit beforehand just to make sure that it also works. And when I click continue, it then just sends it straight to the other server. And when I log into my portfolio next, then I have it right there in my files. And I did not have to download it first and upload it again and make sure that I have it. So that is one thing that I can do. Working with files is quite nice. But since we already heard earlier that it's not so much just about the resources that we upload there and things that we put on Moodle, but also the discussions that are going on and the interactions, I can also send my own forum participations over to Mahara. Unfortunately, you cannot send your entire forum thread. That also has some privacy and copyright reasons that you cannot just take somebody else's content and move it into your portfolio. And therefore, currently, you can only export your own elements, which, of course, in the case of a discussion forum, may be slightly out of context sometimes, so it's not necessarily the ideal way. So hopefully in the future we can find some other solutions how to improve that, because when I only export my own forum post, I'm missing what was written before and what was written after, which might actually be really, really more potentially interesting than my own post by itself. But
do you have a link that you send with it where, you know, when you learn Moodle, you click settings and context? If you export that link as well, that would give you a lot of what's missing.
Yeah, not at the moment, but that would be a very good idea. The issue is that what we also try to do is make it so self-contained so that you can keep your portfolio over a longer period of time and don't always have to be connected to that Moodle site. Because once you leave the institution, for example, that link will not take you anywhere. But that could be a very good intermediate step, and especially as long as you're still at that institution, so that you can refer back to things. If I just want to export this particular forum post, again, all I need to do is click on the Export to Portfolio link. And in this case, I'm choosing the Leap2A portfolio format. That is a portfolio format available, but Mahara also supports, so that the content actually gets exported as journal entry, as blog post. So I can also use it and reuse it more flexibly within my portfolio. So what I've done so far is I've taken 2 items from Moodle, an assignment, which was a file, and also a forum discussion that I wanted to put into my portfolio. And now I have enough to just start putting my portfolio page together. And for that, I go to Pages, I create a page, and I'll call it EduIgnite Wellington because that was the topic. I can also give it some tags so I can find it more easily. And all I need to do now in order to create my portfolio, which I then want to share with others, is to find my file, my assignment, just right here. Give it the slides title. Now I have my slides there to download. Then I also want to have the reflection that I had posted for preparation purposes into my portfolio. And so I import this journal entry. And of course, since I already delivered the presentation, I also want to include the actual presentation, including a recording of it. And so for that, I go to SlideShare because I can't do recordings on Mahara. But what I can do is I can upload my slides to SlideShare and then also put a recording on it. And all I need then from this presentation is the embed code. And I can put that into my portfolio page. And I've got my portfolio page done with a number of different elements that were sitting in different places. Firstly, I've got my presentation recording, which is the final product. Then I also have the reflective thoughts on why I wanted to give that presentation. And I also have the original slides, which came from Moodle, which can also be assessed there since it was a regular assignment. Now, my instructor could use the rubrics that have been available in Moodle 2 now for a short while already, and give me a grade on it, which then my grade is being put into the gradebook and then can also make it into a student management system, for example. So we do not have direct assessment features in Mahara, but what we can do with the integration between Mahara and Moodle is use the assessment features of Moodle to also assess the actual portfolio, but still keep the portfolio also separate from the regular classroom. Because on Moodle, everything is centered around one class each at a time, whereas here in Mahara, I can make that class overarching, or I can make it just for one particular year and so on. And that's how I can start just building my portfolio, by putting things together. And what I can also do in my portfolio, if I, for example, wanted to create my workplace portfolio, all I can have in there. I can have a collection of pages. I don't just need to work with one page and kind of have the Mahara scroll of death, like we know from Moodle, where I just scroll endlessly, have everything on one page, but I can put it into nice chunks and also organize my portfolio like you would do in a regular paper-based portfolio. So I can have an introduction which shows off who I am, where I'm coming from, and then go on to a curriculum vitae, which is information that I put directly into Mahara, into the resume. But what I can also do is I can create little plans and show off just in a list of things, what have I done last year, what am I going to do this year, what am I planning to do next year, for example, so that there's a quick overview for anybody looking at my portfolio, what I have been involved in, what is important to me, and what are also achievements of mine. And then, as I said earlier, because we cannot always have everything created directly in Mahara, in the ePortfolio, I can pull in the information from my outside resources. The easiest is via RSS feeds, because then all that gets just updated automatically. I don't even need to go into my portfolio to make frequent changes, but everything is done automatically for me, as long as I have the connection between these two systems. So whenever I upload a presentation to SlideShare, for example, it is being put here in that list, and I'm done. My portfolio builds itself, and I don't have to do anything to it. And that's really neat, actually, because then at the end of the year, I don't really have to look at accumulating all the things, oh, which conference did I go to, and where did I give a presentation, where did I have a recording, but everything is already in one place. And just here on Mahara, I can put everything together so that I can also have some context information there. And for presentations, for example, that I really like or that I would like to highlight, I put them there as an embedded media so that somebody can immediately click on the play button and listen to it and not be led off to another page. And then, of course, I can also have internal or also external blocks. And if you work with external blocks, you don't have to give your entire block, but you could also have RSS feeds to categories or to specific tags to just really highlight what you want to have in your portfolio. Because a lot of times it shouldn't just be everything that you display, but it should be the selection, the things that are important to you or where you need to reflect on, so you don't just want to have it as a dumping ground there. And now I think we still have about 15 minutes for any questions that you might like to have. We also have some other Mahara users in here who could help me out with some answers if they have some other ideas or things to say. Yes, please.
So if you have both Moodle and Mahara, which do you see the best fit for communities of practice?
I would say Mahara. For me, because at least the way we use it is much more open than Moodle. And we give users the same rights. So on Mahara, for example, we don't really have permissions. You can have a teacher role and a student role, but the teacher role doesn't really give you much more than the student role. And so you are pretty much based on equal footing. And therefore, it is very easy to just set up a group, create a page, and create discussion forums. It's just with a couple of clicks. And so for me, that is easier than setting all that up in Moodle, where you usually need to jump through a few hoops.
So that would sort of require a bit of letting go on the institution's part.
Yeah.
The control freaks in the top
Yeah.
might not be happy with that.
That definitely involves a lot of trust. And we are doing it on myportfolio.school, for example, and there teachers. We did have discussions also around e-responsibility and what to do, and especially with younger students and high school students being on the same platform. It can sometimes be quite challenging. But what is teachers said from a school that did have trouble with just students doing things that they weren't supposed to do, they didn't tell us, please shut that feature down. We don't want it. It's horrible. Our students are misusing it. But they actually talked to the students. They engaged with the students. They made it a learning experience. And now the students don't really post anything offensive on the platform anymore. And so it is really more around talking about digital literacy and engaging with the principals, talking these things through and not just policing things and say, no, we put a border up and a gate up because our students don't do it correctly. There are always a lot of different things to work around and work with the students so that they understand it, because at some point they will need to go out into the world and they are faced with the same problems. And unless we teach them or at least make them aware of how the world works, can they not really learn it and kind of learn how they could cope also with certain phenomena. Eric?
Yeah, Kristina. 57,000 school students on Mahara. I saw another statistic up there from 0 to 1,000 schools in 4 years, 240 minutes a day. Has there been any work done on the potential impact of that cohort of students coming through our schooling system and potential impact on tertiary environment?
I'm not aware of any research being done currently by teachers or so about how many students actually take their portfolio and then would want to use it at the universities here in New Zealand or also elsewhere. We do see an increasing number of schools who are using it more within their schools, so not just 10 students, 20 students, but we have a lot of schools just enrolling everyone and then using the portfolio very heavily and also in a somewhat more structured way. As I said earlier, sometimes classes just have 50 or 100 students and they update their portfolio at the same time because that's the class time they have available. So it is definitely becoming it's becoming increasingly important for them to keep portfolios, also because schools encourage the use, and so the universities will see more students potentially wanting to continue using their portfolios because they have grown up with it, from intermediate school up to high school and so on.
And certainly at this university where currently we've got an e-portfolio project which is looking to sort of give a direction for this whole stuff. One of the factors that has come up is just what you've mentioned, like in terms of choosing a portfolio tool, we've got to choose something that's compatible with what the new generation of high school students will bring with them into the tertiary environment, because it doesn't make any sense for us to have something that they come and then they've got all the stuff they've already done and they want to continue, and we just say, oh, I'm sorry, you can't, you just got to drop it all and start from scratch.
And also the reverse is true, that teachers now starting to use the portfolio at the University of Waikato, they also want to continue using it when they actually go into the schools. And so that is a very good ground for them to actually already have some portfolio knowledge and know how they can employ it with their students. So the departments of education or schools of education here at the New Zealand schools are often actually directly on myportfolio.school, because that way they can already engage with teachers. And when they go into an internship, they are already where everybody else is. So they don't need to ask for permissions to access it or keep portfolios in two places, but they are where everybody else is. And that's the nice thing about having one platform for everyone, because then you worry about the access once, but you don't need to ask the administrator from school A whether they can let you into your learning management and might have to add you to their LDAP or single sign-on in order to make the access work. But because everyone already has a login, they are just there. Yes, please.
With the funding of it for schools in particular, are we further down the track to whether that's going to continue after this year?
No, not yet. No. We hope to be further down the track at some point this year, though, that we can inform everyone. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot. Yeah.
We use both Moodle and Mahara. One of the constant challenges for both us, faculty and for the students, is the linking of the assessment class to the particular artifacts in Mahara. And because of the flexibility that Mahara has, actually provides the frustration of particular faculty's point of view is that they can't get access to the right sorts of artifacts they need to do the assessments, marking, and that sort of stuff. Perhaps we're not using it correctly, but is there any ways that it can be done in terms of linking specific artifacts in Mahara to specific assessment tasks in Moodle to make sure that the faculty have the correct access to be able to do all that sort of stuff?
Yep. There are two ways of doing it. If you want to link it directly to an assignment in Moodle, you would need the Mahara assignment submission plugin. That is available for Moodle, and what you essentially do there is you create your assignment on the Moodle site, and you say this is a Mahara assignment, and then students looking at that assignment can see all their Mahara pages and then submit one of these pages as assignment. And then the teacher can use the regular assignment interface in order to give a grade or give feedback or use the rubrics. A second, and that is pretty much the functionality that we use in the second option, which is that instructors can set up a controlled group on Mahara they do need to have staff access for that. And then they can also decide to have submissions into this group. Because what students can then do is submit their portfolio to that group. Their portfolio gets locked, like it gets locked in the assignment, which is really neat so that they can actually not exchange some content while they are waiting to be assessed. And while the assessment or the giving of feedback is going on, the students cannot change anything. So really the feedback from the teacher then goes for what they have seen there. Mm-hmm.
Just a follow-up question to that.
Yes.
I've had a question from staff here about regrading. So we have a regrading process where sometimes students submit something, it goes back to them with a grade attached, and they might challenge that grade. Now, if they're using a Mahara kind of environment, when it goes back to them, is the portfolio unlocked again for them? It is.
Yes, it is. That is one of the challenges for that particular plugin, and also the way Mahara works currently, that the ePortfolio, or initially it wasn't really developed as assessment tool, and so it does not have a history in there or looking at earlier versions of the page. But what we are looking at is changing the Mahara assignment submission plugin so that it can actually do some of these things, that you can do regrading, or that actually also the page is actually being kept on the university server once it's been assessed, because you do need to keep these things oftentimes for longer, and just for the records. And so there are a number of ways how that could be improved. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Yes, please.
Sometimes, like even in my personal case, I've used like Blackboard and MoodleMoot and doing some doing some courses in US in Sakai. So how well portfolio like that, like multiple ones?
The easiest connection is definitely to Moodle because of MNet and built-in SSO. But we also have web service API available that can be expanded to connect to other systems. And one of the Auckland universities, I think it was Auckland University of Technology, they also made their connection to Blackboard available, and some other universities as well, because it is an open source tool, so anybody can contribute things. And so those institutions that say, yes, we make our code available for others to use, or the technology and experience that we've gained, then that is available in the community itself. We also have a vibrant developer community and also a very vibrant user community. And incidentally, 2 user groups are meeting on Thursday. One entirely online, which will be Friday early morning for us here in New Zealand. That is the group that is out of New York. And they usually have 3 online meetings throughout the year to talk to anyone around the world. And then also the German Mahara user group is going to meet Thursday. Unfortunately, locally in Germany and without any live streaming. So that is kind of, but that is possibilities around where Mahara users can also connect to each other, find out, hey, I know that you're using X, Y, Z. Do you have any ideas, or can you help us? Because even though some people may not publish their code kind of proactively in the community, when you ask them, you can have it a lot of times. And so just asking what, or saying what you're using and asking if somebody else knows about it, then we can also help you get connected to some of these users whom we know better, or who may not really post much in the forums, but of whom we know that they are using similar technologies.
I want to say to people that aren't using my portfolio, that you can, for teachers, that you can do your oration submission to NZQA by my portfolio this year, which will go this year. So that's a bonus to that program, that paper, and being any DVDs.
Yes.
That positive.
Yeah. St. Peter's College in Palmerston North did the trial, and also Hamilton Girls College, Ronja Skanderer here. She's really experienced with that. So if you want to know more how she did, she actually did a trial on it, on how best to submit things. Yeah.
In terms of my portfolio communities in general, or not my portfolio as such, but e-portfolio communities in general, there's also 2 communities that you might not be aware of. One is the ePortfolios Australia community that is quite active, and they have they're having a workshop in Adelaide in a couple of weeks' time called Moodle and Mahara Meetup, which is a one-day workshop on the stuff that Kristina's been talking about. They also have a one-day work forum generally on ePortfolios in October.
It's going to be 2 days actually this year. Yeah, it's the 2nd and 3rd of October, and it's going to be at the University of Canberra.
Yeah. So, and another association that's an international one that you might be interested rejoices in the acronym AAEEBL.
ABLE.
Yeah, with ABLE. And ABLE, I think, is something along the lines of Association for Authentic and Evidence-Based Learning. Does that sound right?
That's perfect, yes.
And they're an international association based from the States that has a focus on ePortfolios. So they run conferences as well, and they have an association that you can belong to. Resources. For example, when I was looking for the University of Waikato project at evaluations of different software tools, I found a heap of stuff at AAEEBL, which meant that we didn't have to do an evaluation. We could simply look at the existing literature and say, yeah, this is how they stack up.
And they also have a lot of webinars throughout the year, because it is quite difficult to get from New Zealand always overseas for every conference or so. And so ABLE has a number of sessions just on ePortfolios that anyone can participate in then. Sometimes for members, sometimes also open to the entire public. And ePortfolios Australia, I think they are also going to record this year's session, at least the keynotes. And from the Moodle Mahara meetup, also the keynotes are going to be recorded and then made available online for everyone to listen to and look at. Yeah, so the meetup is going to be on the 8th, and the ePortfolio Forum on the 2nd and 3rd of October in Canberra, and you can still submit presentations there as well. And that is not just for Mahara in October, but for anything surrounding ePortfolios. And last year we had a really, really good mix of different technologies, different skill levels, different ways of implementing portfolios, and also the differences between the institutions and just seeing what everyone is doing. So it's a really, really great way of sharing experiences and also learning from others. Done.
I've just got a point to make. I guess it's a point about sort of functionality, and if there's something missing in Mahara. Red Hat have a really good catchphrase, which is, with open source software, buy a brick and you get a house. And you know where this is going. In this room, there's at least 2 companies that do software development for Moodle and Mahara. There's Mark down there representing NetSpot. And if you don't like the price he gives you, you can't.
If you don't like the source
Exactly right. And the only caveat I would say is, you know, with the array of developers you can choose from is to try and insist that, or getting the mindset that what you're asking for becomes part of the core product. So try not to sort of say, oh yeah, well we've got that, it works for us, that's great. Just think about, you know, how you get it back into the communities. That's kind of the most important thing in the Mahara project at the moment.
So I guess for one of the takeaway lessons from this is that if you're interested in ePortfolios and you're already running Moodle in your organisation, then there's a reasonable amount of synergy already between Moodle and Mahara. And it's a question, I guess, of working out how those developments can proceed sort of in parallel together rather than thinking of ePortfolios as a separate box. There are some universities in New Zealand that are thinking of ePortfolios as a separate box. The most obvious example is Victoria University. You have an ePortfolio tool that they make available to all students, and it's through their career hub. So it's actually through their careers promotion area, so very much what Kristina's been calling a showcase portfolio for employers. That's what they've done, but it's actually a completely separate box. And my view is that actually you get a lot more value out of the whole ePortfolio thing if you can mash it up and mesh it with the other things you're doing in Moodle. But anyway, I'd like to thank Kristina very much for stepping into the breach at reasonably short notice and giving us some insights into that.